Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Congresswoman and Democratic presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard, accompanied by Otto Lee, Richard Louis, and Viet Nguyen.
Hey, everybody. Hi. Good to see you guys. Aloha. How you guys doing? Thanks for hanging out with us.
Well, thanks for making it across the country.
Thank you.
It's, I know, been tough for the three that have come to today's forum. Thank you for spending your time here for the first ever gathering for the Democratic AAPI Forum.
It is well worth the trip, but so important, and thanks to you guys for making this a priority in your busy schedules, and to the AAPI Victory Fund and Asian Americans Rising for putting this important forum together.
What was it like when you had three Asian American Pacific Islanders standing on the debate stage, one next to each other?
Yeah, it's
I
historic.
saw the picture and I was like,
Yeah.
I think I'm in the bizarro world.
Sadly, we're at a place where you think that, right? When
Right.
you see this,
Right.
which just points to the reason why this forum is important, the work that we have ahead of us to make it so that our elected leaders at every level of government are actually representing the diversity that exists within our communities.
Did you do a little low five or a side five to the other, because you're all up
There's
there?
a secret signal. I can't tell
Yeah,
you,
it's
otherwise it
like,
won't be a secret signal.
I saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like sometimes you started in politics and the state legislator at 21, joined the National Guard a year or so later.
Yeah.
You met your husband through politics when he volunteered on your 2012 run. So do you kind of feel like when you're looking back at it all, do you kind of feel like it's been kind of pre-cut for you, this journey to politics?
No, not at all. I'm grateful to have grown up in Hawaii. It's the state that is the only state that is a majority of quote-unquote minorities, the most diverse state in the country. And I know for a lot of my friends, growing up in Hawaii, being a person of color was not a thing. But when they went off to college or they went to the mainland, they're like, oh, wait, what? Everywhere is not like this in Hawaii. Everywhere is not as diverse when it comes to race, ethnicity, religion, people coming from all different parts of the world and living together in what we call that spirit of aloha. For me, growing up, fourth of 5 kids, if any one of you would have met our family, I would have been the last one that you would have said, oh, she's going to be elected in politics one day.
Why so?
I was incredibly shy. I'm an introvert naturally, and I had no problem with it. You think I'm joking? My sister's behind stage, and she's got some stories for you, I guarantee. I had my nose in the books. I did martial arts. I surfed, and we went hiking, and I was just fine putting my little sister out front as my spokesperson. Simple things like mom saying, "Hey guys, can you go and pick up some bread from the grocery store?" I wouldn't talk to the clerks at the store. I didn't like answering the phone. So my eventual decision to run for office really came from something I experienced from a young age, was just how happy I was when I was doing things for others, service, being kind to others, making a positive difference in their lives, whether it was small things like, growing up in Hawaii, we have beautiful beaches. So my friends and I used to go and pick up trash off the beaches on the weekend because, this is our home. We got to take care of it. And it was really my passion around environmental issues and clean air and clean water that motivated me to take what was a very difficult personal step to run for office at 21, knock on doors, give speeches, like the whole thing. It was tough.
I think you did okay. What do you think?
I'm working on it.
Decent.
I'm working on it.
Now, you were born in American Samoa,
Yes.
is that right? And you grew up in Hawaii.
Yeah.
I think you might be the first Pacific Islander candidate for president that I can
I think you're right,
of.
actually.
Possibly the first from Hawaii?
Not the first from Hawaii. There's an amazing woman, Congresswoman Patsy Mink.
Yeah, right.
I mean, we're setting aside President Obama, right? President Obama was born in Hawaii. We claim him. But there's a woman, Congresswoman Patsy Mink, who was the first Asian American to run for president. And a lot of people don't remember this, but she's got, I want to push her up for a minute because The congressional seat that I serve in now was one that she once held. She was the first Asian American woman elected to the United States Congress. And she ran for president and was on the ballot, I think, in a couple of states, really motivated by ending the Vietnam War. That was her sole mission in running for president, was to bring voice to those who were calling for an end to the Vietnam War. But she only got into politics because when she graduated from high school, she wanted to become a doctor. So she started applying to schools, and every single school turned her away because she was Asian American and because she was a woman.
Yeah.
And she said, you know what? Screw this. So she went and got...
Did she really say that? Screw
Well,
this?
she may have paraphrased it differently, but she's pretty fierce.
Yeah, I
She's
know
pretty
that.
fierce.
Right,
And so she got a law degree just so that she could be in a position later getting elected into different levels of office so she could change the laws, change the culture of discrimination that stood in her path. And she's most known for her legacy in Congress in passing Title IX, which opened the doors for women everywhere. We have a lot of high school students here, high school students and college students, women athletes, to be able to compete. It's huge.
There are some countries that legislate, since you were talking about the gender balance or imbalance in politics, as well in other spaces. Let's stay there for a moment.
Sure.
There are certain countries that say you must have 50-50 in our legislative body. Is that what it will take?
I hope not. I hope not. And I think that as we see, I think in the 2018 elections, across every level of government, we saw more women running for office than ever before in our country's history.
That's right.
Hundreds of women who were stepping up and saying our voices need to be heard. And so I'm inspired and encouraged by that. There are more women serving the United States Congress now than ever before. And it's so cool on this campaign trail getting to meet little girls in, second and third grade, girls in high school who are saying, yeah, I'm going to do what you're doing. Right. Tell me, what are the first 3 things I need to do? It's just amazing. I have hope for our future.
Well, you also hear an AAPI forum.
Yes.
And oftentimes when we have AAPIs together, the Asian American part tends to dominate. Can you talk more about the Pacific Islander part, since you do have these origins in American Samoa? And what does that mean for you? And what would you bring that's different because of the Pacific Islander background?
Yeah, I want to tell you something that I just learned, though, less than a year ago. There's a show on PBS called Finding Your Roots with Dr. Gates, and it's a great show, right? So I was asked, they called and they said, would you like to be on the show? I said, oh yeah, of course, that'd be an amazing opportunity. And I learned a lot about my own ancestry just through the course of that show, and found, as they did their DNA testing, that I'm 26% Southeast Asian. I had no idea.
Wow.
Polynesian on my dad's side, Caucasian on my mom's side, and a whole diverse mix there, and 26% Southeast Asian. And Dr. Gates said at the end it was the most diverse mix of DNA that they had ever seen in their show. But one thing that I found that's interesting is that since finding this out, I adjusted things and put it into Wikipedia and let people in the media know that if you're reporting on this is the accurate way to explain my ethnicity and my ancestry. And they haven't done it. They haven't done it, which I think points to just, unfortunately, how dismissive, present company excluded, a lot of our mainstream media is to, who we are, how diverse we are as people, as Asian Americans, as Pacific Islanders, and just see they're not white people. And so this is something they keep on reporting it wrong. It's hey, no, Asian, Polynesian, Caucasian. But I think it's just, it points to the work that we have ahead of us to try to increase awareness and understanding of who we are, the diverse cultures that we have. And even as Pacific Islanders, being born in American Samoa, being raised in Hawaii, where we have people from across the Pacific, and our cultures are very much intertwined with each other. And for us, coming from that melting pot of culture, the thing that we share wherever we go is that aloha spirit, which is really a spirit of respect and care for one another.
And kind of riding off of Yet's question, you represent a pretty large population or community of AAPI voters.
Yes.
What have you been hearing in terms of what they're really concerned about? Because we can read about what they're concerned about, but you've been there, not just in Hawaii, but across the nation. So what are they concerned about, and how do you respond to that?
You know, the concerns are, at a broad general level, not so different from the concerns we hear in other places. You know, healthcare remains an issue that's top of mind for most folks, and the statistics and the numbers show that Asian Americans are uninsured at a higher rate of I think, any other demographic, which points to the need that we hear every day in the political world is the urgent need to reform our healthcare system so that every single American in this country is able to get the care they need when they need it, no matter how much or how little money they have in their pocket. Opportunity, opportunity. For us, we live in a high cost of living state, like some places here in California. And for us in Hawaii, there's a lot of concern about the brain drain and our kids graduating from high school and feeling like in order to have an opportunity to get a good paying job and to pursue the kind of work that they want to do, they have to leave our home that we love so much. And I think that for our families is a major issue. And all of that is driven by, rent is extremely expensive. It's very hard to begin to think about affording a home for your family and to think about how are you going to pay for your child's education. And so all of these things factor into, I think, a challenge that we have. We're seeing families being separated, and for a lot of my friends, they've moved to California or Las Vegas or Oregon or Washington State just so they can afford to raise their kids with a good quality of life, but they're sad that they can't raise them in the culture that we were brought up in.
Representative, moving into an issue you know quite well. You represent a heritage of military service in your family, yourself included, with 2 tours in the Middle East. As we now come close to an anniversary, an unfortunate anniversary in our great country of 9/11, we have to ask what might be your approach to secure our country, to secure the world, and what leadership role we might take. As you understand, we learned just within the last 24 hours that the president had decided to call off a meeting with the Taliban at Camp David. That's part of what, as president, you would do. Day to day, these are multiple issues involving countries around the world and security, not only of the United States, but really of the world. What will be your presidency known for when it comes to international security?
Yeah, thank you. This is such an important question because our foreign policy is too often relegated as a side issue when really it directly impacts every other challenge, every other issue, every other need that the American people have today through the cost. The money, the trillions of dollars that we've spent since 9/11 alone in 2001, over $6 trillion spent on waging these wasteful, counterproductive wars that have not served the interests of our national security. They've actually made our country less safe, as we've seen these wars in places like Iraq and Libya and Syria actually strengthening terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. The toll that it takes on my brothers and sisters in uniform. 4,419 men and women service members have lost their lives in Iraq.
And
would you meet with the Taliban?
Yes, under the right circumstances, with a clear objective that would further our national security and further the cause of peace. Yes. And I think this is the mindset that I bring to the most important responsibility the president has, which is to serve commander-in-chief, is that problem-solving mindset, that results-oriented mindset of thinking about putting the interests of the American people and our national security and peace at the forefront of our foreign policy, stop being the world's police, actually be a force for good in the world, and recognize that the only alternative to diplomacy and discussions is war. So if our goal is to be able to prevent war, to make sure that our men and women in uniform are only being sent into harm's way as a last resort to keep the American people safe, we've got to be willing to have those conversations and meet with our adversaries, recognizing that if we lack the courage to do so, then the only alternative is war. And there are many examples throughout our country's history of presidents who've understood this and who've been great examples of that.
President Trump's China policy
Yeah.
right now. That's an attempt to engage without warfare, but with
Yeah.
other means. Do you agree?
Economic warfare.
Economic warfare, yes.
Yeah.
But if you don't agree, then what is the other? Do you think that China is as much of a threat as some people would say? And if so, what is the proper means of confronting that?
I think China is unnecessarily becoming, the tensions are unnecessarily being ratcheted up with China in a way that's dangerous for us and dangerous for the world. This is what happens when you have a president, as we do right now, who has a very erratic and impulsive and emotional way of doing things. And when you're dealing with such issues of importance that are impacting this economic warfare, this trade and tariff war, he's got a shoot from the hip approach. I think a couple of weeks ago, he declared that China is our enemy. These things have very real consequences, especially as we're dealing with a nuclear-armed country, especially as we're dealing with a country whose economic interests are very interwoven with our own. We have differences that we need to work out. We've got to be able to do that, doing the tough work of negotiations, not reacting impulsively and emotionally, providing that steady hand of leadership that creates the space to work out those differences, while also recognize when it comes to things like climate change, we've got to be able to work with China if we're serious about addressing the climate problems that face our planet as a whole. Otherwise, even if we do every single thing that we must here in the United States, we won't even come close to dealing with the urgent threat that we face.
And you just kind of described President Trump as impulsive. At the same time, you came out with your stance on his impeachment, saying that you believe it will tear America apart.
Yeah.
Could you kind of expand on that?
Yeah, sure. Our country's already being torn apart, unfortunately, and it's very disheartening to see how divided our country has become, and it's being divided on political lines, it's being divided on racial lines, ethnic lines, religious lines, and it's undermining our democracy. And so when we look at Congress's role in providing oversight over the executive branch, Congress must continue to carry out that role. The problem with pursuing impeachment is twofold. One is, even if the House Democrats vote to impeach Trump, the Senate is under Republican control, which means Trump isn't going anywhere. Number two is, by going through this process, it will further tear the country apart, because you've got a very large group of people in this country who feel like Democrats are trying to undermine their votes. The best way to defeat Donald Trump, and we must defeat Donald Trump, is by doing the work that we as Democrats must do in offering a powerful vision on how we will serve the people in this country and make sure that voters are the ones who throw him out of the White House.
You might know this guy, Barack Obama.
I've heard of him a couple of
You've heard him
times.
a couple times. You might know him.
Can I tell you just this really quick funny story on this? Because the very first time that I was a member of Congress, he came in to give his State of the Union address. As he walked down the middle aisle, coming in towards the rostrum there, we're reaching out and saying hi to him as he was coming in, and he saw me and he said, "Hey, aloha." I said, "Aloha, Mr. President." And one of my colleagues, who's a congressman here in California, after he walked by, he's like, "Tulsi, that is so cool. It's like you guys have your own language or something."
Yeah. Your own language.
Exactly. Our own.
That's Aloha's way out there.
Right.
He, very early on, because you were bringing up a division through your questions and how you might bring the country together, he had to come to address the country at a time during very high racial tension, shall I say, in cities across America. It was a speech he did not want to have to make. It was an issue that he did not necessarily think, I'm going to become president, and this is what I'm going to lead with. Now, as you see these divisions in America today, who will you be most like in the way you address race in America? Will you be most like Barack Obama? Will you be most like LBJ? Who will you be most like? Or I know you're going to be yourself, but if you were to look at one that you admire in terms of the way they handled it.
I think there are examples from everyone from Barack Obama to Abraham Lincoln that we can look to for inspiration in how we unify our country. And yes, I can only be myself. And what what I am focused on, even now as we're in this campaign and we're going to, rural towns and big cities in different parts of the country, respecting people as fellow Americans. That basic act of respect and aloha goes a very long way in letting people know that, hey, we're here to listen. I want to hear your voice. I want to hear your concerns and the pain and the struggles that you and your family may be going through. Not diminishing them, whether it's because of the letter that's next to their name of their political party or who they voted for in the last election. We must come together as a country if we're serious about solving the problems that challenge us all. It's not just about speaking to Democrats or Republicans just speaking to Republicans. This is what is so wrong about our political process now. And as a result of this message of unity, of coming together, of leaving no one behind, at every one of our campaign events, we have Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Libertarians, almost everyone. We were in Atlanta a few weeks ago, and we had last-minute trip, less than 24 hours notice. About 300 people came out, and after I said my piece, we did some Q&A, and like the third or fourth question in, a guy raised his hand, and he said, I'm a Republican, and I voted for Donald Trump, and he sounded a little sheepish. He said, but I'm here. And the whole place started clapping. The whole place started clapping because people recognize that it's long overdue time for us to come together and just treat each other in the way that we wish we could be treated and fight for each other, understanding that an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. We stand together united as Americans because divided we fall.
I have to visit Hawaii in about 10 days or 2 weeks.
You have to.
I have to. And so one of the things I probably will have to at least think about is a controversy there about Mauna Kea.
Yes.
The construction of a telescope.
Will you be going to that island?
No, but
Okay.
I will be giving a talk where I might be getting questions about this.
I'm
So I want to
sure.
ask you first.
Sure.
It's a controversy because
Yeah.
a lot of Native Hawaiians oppose the building of this telescope. Tell us what your stance is on this, because this is an issue where your negotiating skills might have to come into play.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate thing that's dividing a lot of folks in Hawaii right now. There is a powerful movement of kia'i, or protectors, who are there at the base of Mauna Kea right now, literally putting their bodies and camping out there to try to stop the construction of, I believe, what would be the largest telescope in the world. There are already a number of telescopes that have been built on the top of Mauna Kea. Just for some background, for Native Hawaiians, Mauna Kea is a sacred place. It's a place where Native Hawaiian practitioners will go to worship. For them, this is their church. And so when you look at the massive construction that would take years to build this telescope, just try to imagine a telescope or a major object being built in your place of worship, or some place that's special and sacred to you. So that's really what's at the heart of why they're gathered there and protesting this construction. There are other Native Hawaiians who support it, who talk about Native Hawaiian history in astrology and navigation of the seas using the stars, and that this is bringing technology to that. I think the counterpoint is there's another place in Spain, in the Canary Islands, that really wants this telescope, and maybe they should have it there. The controversy here is the governor is doing all that he can to push the project forward in spite of these protests. The project has gone through all of the legal steps and met every one of those steps. So this is really a point here about do you follow the steps that have been laid out in the law, or is there really a bigger conversation here that has to be had about Native Hawaiian practitioners and the preservation of sacred places? So my position on this is that there are a number of telescopes that have already been built. There are a number of them that are already decommissioned, that are no longer being used. And the desecration of this sacred place is an issue that has never been addressed with the Native Hawaiian community. So before any talk of actually beginning construction takes place, they need to make things right with the Native Hawaiian community first. There you go. Hawaii's in the house.
Representative, you talk about this change that needs to happen in this culture of warmongering. Can you kind of expand on that? I mean, Richard mentioned the cancellations at Camp David. You have your experience as a vet, 2 tours. What do you mean by that? And what's kind of the change you're hoping to see with that?
You know, I had a soon-to-be graduating high school student came to one of our events the other night, and the very first thing out of his mouth was, "We have been at war longer than I've been alive." Like, that was a very striking thing for this young man to come and share with me, that this was having such an impact on him, that in his life as a young American, he's never known anything different. As President and Commander-in-Chief, and this is what's driving me to run for president, to bring that experience that I have, both as a soldier, serving now for over 16 years, of deploying twice to the Middle East, of serving in a medical unit, seeing that high cost of war, combined with the experience that I bring from almost 7 years in Congress, focused on the Armed Services Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, Homeland Security Committee, bringing the combination of these experiences, the understanding, and most importantly, the conviction to be able to bring about the sea change in foreign policy, standing up to the military-industrial complex that's profited heavily from our being at war for so long, and to hold strong against the foreign policy establishment in Washington that you see has carried influence over both Democrat and Republican administrations. It's not a partisan thing. To bring about an end to these wasteful regime change wars, work to end this new Cold War we alluded to, with escalating tensions between the U.S. and Russia and China, and the arms race that goes with that, and redirect those trillions of dollars we've been spending towards actually serving the needs of our people. And things like health care for all, things like education, infrastructure, protecting our environment, addressing climate change. We've got to get our priorities straight in this country. And while doing so, recognize that saying we'll end wasteful wars does not equate isolationism. It doesn't mean we turn our back on the world and only look inward. No, it means that we fulfill our potential and actually lead the world in being a force for good, leading with a foreign policy based on cooperation rather than conflict, being able to resolve our differences through diplomacy and explore our potential, finding that common interest that we share with countries around the world.
Unlike most members of Congress, I think he likes you. I think he likes you.
There you go.
Unlike most members of Congress, you know how to fire a gun.
Yes.
And a rifle. And you brought up that generation of Americans that have known no other day but being at war. And that is the same generation that has known no other day that has included this active shooter generation. Yeah. I've had to cover way too many of these stories. As we now mark 292 mass shootings as of this weekend, that number went up by another one, by the way, in the last several days. What is your plan as you return to Congress and as president to address gun violence in America that is real progress when we see a very, and you know this better than most folks in this room, that we've had way too much this side and that side and nothing moving forward?
Exactly. I mean, that really gets to the heart of the problem there, Richard, is how such a powerful and important issue as keeping our children safe, keeping our loved ones safe, has been relegated to such a divisive one. That is one of these issues that's really tearing our country apart when you look at it from the political sense. But when you're actually just talking to folks, and the polls are showing this, that more Americans across party lines agree on the common sense gun safety legislation reforms that we need to pass by far, over 80% in most cases. So knowing this, it begs the question, why has nothing been done? It's because in Washington, the day-to-day and the policies are driven by the extremes, with a whole lot of fear factoring going on both sides, and both sides pointing the finger at the other saying you're the problem, but no actual problem solving taking place. So we voted on legislation and passed it with bipartisan support out of the House of Representatives months ago to make sure that there's universal mandatory background checks. The tragedy and the murder that we saw just took place in El Paso is one example where it appears that a universal background check would have prevented that shooter from being able to purchase a gun. That's what these sensible reforms are in place for, to prevent those who would seek to do harm to others from being able to put a gun, this weapon, in their hands. Now, when you look at the extremes, you've got on one side people who say that there should be no restriction whatsoever to their Second Amendment rights, none whatsoever. And on the other hand, you have folks who are saying, well, we shouldn't have any guns at all. We should repeal the Second Amendment. But it's a false choice, in my opinion. And I think most Americans agree that we can and should uphold our Second Amendment rights while also making sure that those who are owning guns are doing so in a safe manner and will not do harm to others, who are not going to use those guns to others.
But what will your message be this week, right? Let's get to your job at hand today, because you can actually do something. You're an elected member of Congress from the great state of Hawaii.
Yeah. Well, we're going back to Congress next week, continuing to push to pass legislation, calling on Mitch McConnell to pass the bills that the House has already passed to make these changes. I think this is where, and reaching out to Republicans in doing so, again, we've got to make it so that this is not the partisan issue it has become and has been for so long. So much of that pressure to make an impact and to make a difference needs to come from the grassroots. It is the people of this country that need to come together and say, hey, Senator McConnell, do your job. Let the people vote. Let our voices be heard.
Perhaps the most important issue for Asian American Pacific Islander voters, like it is for most people, is the economy.
Yeah.
Economic inequality. How would you address this? I assume you think it's a real issue, but
It is a real issue.
How would you address? What are the
Yeah.
concrete things that you would do to address economic inequality? Would it be higher taxes on the wealthy? Would it be a higher minimum wage? What are your policies?
I mean, as you mentioned, this is a problem that is taking a toll increasingly on the Asian American community, but it's one also that's further driving a wedge between the haves and the have-nots in this country. I think there are deep issues that we need to address in policy making that reflect in our tax code and in our trade policy. The scales are weighted towards the rich and powerful and the big corporations who benefit the most that end up leaving everyone else behind. I think this is what's at the heart of the problem. You've got the rich and government of the rich and powerful rather than a government of, by, and for the people. The fact that Amazon has gone without paying taxes now for a few years and has also gotten millions of dollars in a tax credit while the rest of the people pay their taxes and do their duty and struggle often in fulfilling that speaks to the heart of the problem here. There are I just mentioned briefly trade policy. It's the same problem. You know, when these massive trade deals are negotiated, we've seen time and time again who is hurt most by them and who benefits from them. It's big multinational corporations who benefit, and it's the American worker that loses in the process. We've got to make sure that people in this country are able to earn a living wage. You know, there's a bill and an effort that's moving across the country as we fight for a $15 minimum wage. But even, again, in cities like Los Angeles, in states like mine, $15 don't put a roof over your head. It doesn't come close to the living wage that a lot of folks need in different areas. So we can't think that once we implement that will somehow be enough. We've got to deal with every aspect of this, which is fighting for people to be able to earn a living wage, fighting for unions to be able to continue to be an advocate for working people in this country, deal with the massive affordable housing shortage that we have that's feeding into this, and reform our healthcare system that drains so much of the resources and causes so much stress for families who are fearful that one healthcare emergency, one visit to the emergency room, whether your child breaks their arm or, you know, something happens, that breaks the bank and they're put out on the street. So we've got to look at this from every perspective and recognize what is fueling this income inequality and help lift up the people in this country.
Representative, at this time, if you would join me, we are going to see if anyone in the audience has some questions as we make our way
Sure.
down. I know a lot of people here are from California. Just real quickly, what's your favorite thing about California?
The food.
The food.
I love the food here. There are so many different kinds of food and cultures. I'm vegan, and there's amazing plant-based restaurants here.
There is.
So we always try to visit at least one when we
Yes.
come to visit.
California is the place for plant-based food, so you're at the right place.
Exactly.
What is your name? Where are you from?
Good afternoon. Thank you for taking my
Thank
question.
you.
My name is Wes. I'm from San Diego. I have a twofold question. My husband came to the United States as an LGBT refugee from Syria.
Wow.
His only family that remains alive is his sister, who's still trapped in Syria, and we can't get her out. She missed her brother's wedding. She's missed many moments in his life. So first, I don't want to belabor something that's in the past, but I'd like to know, in light of your past, your current commitment to LGBT rights, and second, what would you do specifically and quickly relative to the abhorrent travel ban that's been in place?
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your family's story and continued hardship. Appreciate you bringing voice to that here. I was raised in a very socially conservative family growing up and held views when I was very, very young that I no longer hold and haven't for quite some time as it relates to equality for LGBT Americans. I had the honor of serving with great patriots from across this country, including LGBT Americans, and both in training as well as while we were deployed in war zones. I had no doubt for a moment in my mind that any one of them would give their life for me as I would for them. And for me, coming home from those deployments, I had an opportunity to really reflect in my own heart about what does freedom really mean, and when we stand up for equality for all Americans, what does that really mean, both in our own hearts, but also as we apply that in our laws? And you'll see that throughout my time in Congress now for almost 7 years, that change and that reflection, that commitment to truly fighting for equality is shown through my legislative record. I have fought and will continue to fight as president or wherever I am for equality for LGBT Americans and for everyone. And to your question, quickly, we've got to lift that travel ban.
Thank you. Moving right along, we want to get to as many people as we can. I saw your hand. Real quick, what is your name? And if you don't mind, I don't know if there's a way that you could kind of come out here. And while you're doing that, I will get to your question real quick. If you can give us your name and where you're from.
My name is Sadruddin Noorani. I'm from Chicago. Came to see you all
for
the way.
being here. Oh my gosh.
You
came a long ways.
Yes, thank you for coming and having this forum and letting people know what your goals and plans are. My question is about veterans who fight for us to defend our country, United States, and then when they come injured, and then sometimes they're retired or laid off or whatever, their life is miserable here most of the time. Not all, but most of the time. What is the plan and project that you have or you're thinking about the safeguard of those veterans, those who come back?
Thank you. Thank you for asking that. This is one that's near and dear to my heart, as you can imagine. Friends of mine, people who I served with, have come home, and some of them really struggling with both visible and invisible wounds, scars from their time in service, their time in war that they have brought home with them. It is some of these struggles that is driving the tragedy that is almost 22 veterans every single day taking their own lives. So there's great need that we have both for veterans who are dealing with post-traumatic stress, but who are unable to get the kind of mental health care and resources that they need. There's great need in the fact that we still have far too many veterans in this country who are living on the street, who are dealing with substance abuse because they haven't been able to get the help they need to deal with the struggles of their past, veterans who are unemployed. There are many challenges that we need to address, and the reforms that I would bring as president to our VA would be to make sure that the taxpayer dollars we are putting towards that service are actually getting to our veterans, and make sure that this agency is not a bureaucracy that continues to feed into itself, but one that is actually focused on fulfilling its mission of serving our veterans. And I'll close on this last point, because too often there's a stigma around veterans saying that, well, if you've gone and you've served in combat, whether it's been on one, but most people have served on 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 deployments at this point, that somehow you're damaged goods, that somehow every veteran that comes home is not whole. But the reality is that, and this is a message to employers and people within our communities, veterans are a great asset, because you're talking about people who've made that decision in their lives to put service above self. They have lived and worked under the most high-pressure situations. They are leaders who are able to make decisions under fire and know what it means to work well as a member of a team. So my hope is that in this country, we together can change the culture of how we view veterans, not just as people who we might shake their hands if you see them in a Veterans Day parade, or once a year say thank you for your service, but actually stand up and appreciate that service by helping veterans find outlets to continue to serve, and for the rest of the country to benefit from that experience, service, and leadership. Thank you.
And last but not least, moving on to this gentleman, where you're from, your name, and just a quick 15-second question. Representative, quick 30-second answer would be great.
Thank you.
Hi, Tulsi. Otto Lee from Sunnyvale, California.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you again.
Fellow veteran, by the way. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Tulsi. Yeah, fellow veteran, both served in the Middle East and Iraq. My question is about the image of the Democratic Party. The Republicans always tout themselves as a party that's strong on defense. You've served, the occupant in the White House pretend that he served, but with Bone Spurs reasons he couldn't make it. I would like to know how you could message it so as to show not only yourself as a presidential candidate, but how the Democratic Party truly is a party that would truly make America stronger again than being attacked by cyber attacks. And we have Mitch McConnell not willing to pass a bill to defend our electoral system.
Exactly.
Right? So, which is ultimately ridiculous.
Thank you. Thanks for raising this. I will be brief. Look, as the experience that I brings both the understanding and the consequence of these wasteful wars, as well as the understanding and the experience that best equips me to serve you as Commander-in-Chief and keep our country safe. Our party, the Democratic Party, needs to be the party of the people. It needs to bring the voice to the voiceless. It cannot be a party that represents corrupt corporate special interests. This is the reforms that I'm pushing for within our own party. The best way that you all can be a part of bringing about this systemic change that we need to see, both within our political systems and within our country, is to be engaged in the process. Your primaries here are on March 3rd. Every single one of you needs to be a part of not just showing up and voting, but gathering your community together, those who you have an impact and influence over, and being that change. I want to ask you for your support. We can win California. We can move our country forward and make sure that we have a government that is truly of, by, and for the people.
Great.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to move us back on stage. At this time, we heard from a lot of people.
Thank you.
A lot of supporters.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And just a lot of different concerns that they have raised today, and just even now,
yes.
As we were talking to people who came from all over just to hear. Give us your last remarks.
Thank
to
you.
the audience.
Thank you very much. You know, we've talked a lot. You mind if I stand?
Please.
We've talked a lot here today about how divided we are as a country. This is a discussion that's happening in rooms like this, in halls like this, across the country, with people coming together who want to do something about it. And I appreciate that all of you took the time to be here today because you care. because you care and you want to see the kind of change that we need to bring about in this country. And you also recognize that the only way we make this change is when we, the people, raise our voices, exercise our right to vote, strengthen our democracy, and make sure that it's working for us. The obstacles are great. When you look at things like health care, immigration, criminal justice reform, the environment, climate change, there are so many challenges that we need to address. And we've got a great frustration that these problems have not been solved in the past. And we can point to two major problems. One is that our political system is more concerned about hyper-partisanship than it is about fulfilling the mission that we all have, Democrat and Republican, in serving the people. And the other major problem, which is the influence of big corporate special interests and the rich and powerful over our political system. Where if you've got a lot of money, you can hire some expensive lobbyists. You have the ability to buy your seat at the table to help write the laws that impact all of us. That impact all of us. And we can see this, for example, through our healthcare system. Still today, it is terrible that Medicare cannot negotiate lower drug prices with prescription drug companies. And you wonder, how is this possible? How is this possible when the United States government, which really is representing our taxpayer dollars and should be representing our interests, our government is the largest purchaser of prescription drugs on the planet. On the planet. So think about how much leverage we have understanding that. How much purchasing power we would have with these prescription drug companies to drive their prices lower. This is why they've spent so much money on lobbyists, on PAC contributions, on these politicians to make sure that our laws don't change, to make it so Medicare is not allowed to negotiate lower prices for the people. This is just one heartbreaking example of so many about the problems with our system and the challenge that's before all of us today. The challenge that's before all of us today to stand up as leaders in our own communities, in our own ways to bring about this change, to overcome the big obstacles of big money and big power in politics, and to remember, as we've seen throughout our country's history, through civil rights heroes like Dr. King, no matter the adversity, when we, the people, rise up and let our voices be heard, we will be the change we need to see in restoring our democracy to fulfill that vision that our founders had for us, that we would have elected leaders who are truly focused on serving the people of this country. As your president, these are the principles and values that I bring, those values of service above self, prepared to lead our country and to lead a government that is of, by, and for the people. Your involvement is essential to our ability to be able to bring about this change. Failure is not an option. Quitting is not an option, because what we have at stake is our lives and our future. This is what we are fighting for. We are fighting to make sure that we have one. Thank you all for being here. I hope you consider my candidacy as you think about who you'll support. Visit Tulsi2020.com for more information. Thank you so much. Great to see you all here.